Hi, welcome to the Children's Ministry Web Summit, brought to you by PajamaConference.com and David C. Cook. I'm Tish Webb, and I'm excited to share with you today about legacy for longevity. Children's ministry is much more than what most people believe. Some think it's just a babysitting service to have during the more important adult service. Others think it's something just for the teens or moms to take care of. I'm going to take you on a journey of how I have observed decades of powerful fruitfulness of children's ministries. I'm 60 years old and I've been in the church most of that time. My father pastored for 40 years and my mother was children's ministry pioneer in small community churches in the 50s that didn't have real children's ministry. She would seek out materials to teach a small, various age group that would gather during Sunday mornings, and I learned by assisting her and helping with Vacation Bible School programs. She would do Christmas musicals and make the most out of very, very limited supplies and definitely limited volunteers. Usually, there weren't any volunteers, as most of the people were newly saved and needed to be trained and in the adult service themselves. My father was really an evangelist pastor. We started out in a large city of Indianapolis, where he was mentored by first being a Sunday school superintendent at his church when he was 25 years old. My mother taught a children's class. One of the toddlers today is a pastor in that city. She was barely 20. They were then sent out as a church plant to a small town southern community in very poverty-stricken area. The houses there had four-corner foundations, meaning rocks or cement blocks on corners to hold the floor off the ground, coal stoves to heat the homes, and government commodities to share as food supplementation. That a commodity was prior to food stamps and would be like a tin can full of peanut butter. But as a toddler, I had attended historic Christian gatherings in the famous Cadle Tabernacle in Indianapolis. It was a mega church of its day, but during the 50s it served mostly for large evangelistic meetings. It would seat 10,000 with a choir of additional 1,400 seats. In the center of the Midwest, I can remember being passed over the heads of people as the aisles were full. No fire codes then. In order to find a seat behind the speaker in the choir section, that speaker being the young Oral Roberts. Just a small toddler then, and the place was packed to capacity. That was just a side note of the vision cast in my father in his 20s. He was serving his local church in Indianapolis as a smaller gathering, and then we were sent to pioneer in several churches in the South. I was given piano lessons because of the musical gift my mother recognized at a young age. Just a few years into lessons, and I was encouraged to play in church, and eventually was leading worship as a teen. I began playing in church at the age of 9, as most churches were limited in resources, such as someone to play the piano. Small, poor communities' survival is their first focus. We call worship at that time song service. So as a very young teen of 12 years old, I would have the responsibility to find the songs, learn to play them, and then lead the congregation in singing. Years later, and marriage caused me to move away, and then over the years, my husband and I pioneered 2 churches, did missions work in numerous nations on several continents. We've traveled over the last 30 years and sent out teams and individuals to over 40 nations in missions ministry from a small town back in Indiana. My 2 adult children, along with their spouses, are in leadership and ministry today. I say all of this just to make a point of how fruitfulness is measured in many ways. One measurement is longevity. We think that children's ministry is keeping the children engaged and learning, while hopefully getting some committed volunteers to help. That's one fruit. But another is long-term deposits that are evident when you are maybe not there or in another ministry. Some even think that children's and teen ministry is just a stepping stone for other ministries. I don't hold to that kind of thinking. I believe it's a critical ministry. And even more important at one point than possibly music and the homeless and the jail ministry, because when we help form and shape children, that spiritual development carries them through their adult life, and they don't have to, as an adult, unlearn the pain that they suffered as a child. I believe children's ministries are critical. This conclusion had always directed my time and energy. As I walked through my history, I began to see the reason that this was so resolute in me. When walking through the memories of the 50s and 60s, my life was not consumed with many things other than the Lord and His house. Some say that you'll lose your child if you have them in church too much, but some of my fondest memories are of that time. I mentioned Cadle Tabernacle, a historic building designed to accommodate traveling evangelists in the early 20th century. The history of Cadle and his predecessor, Lakin, were visionaries. Cadle was an entrepreneur, and he desired to build a large facility big enough to accommodate 10,000 plus the 1,400-seat choir. The facility was even used at one point by Reverend Martin Luther King. Cadle was saved because of his mother's prayers and named that facility after her. Later, he turned the ministry over to Lakin, who was known as the Prince of Preachers. And Lakin, then in later life, mentored the young Jerry Falwell. I know this may seem boring, but stay with me. If you remember, I was in meetings when Oral Roberts was in Indianapolis. But the point I'm making is the passing of batons and the need to raise up spiritual sons and daughters. At times I remember my father listening to the stories of an elderly man who would recall being in Marie Wordsworth Etter meetings, and we all know what a pioneer she was of the gospel. Today, many are mesmerized by the fat, the fast, and the flashy ministries that pop up and have little character to make a solid foundation. Many of these fall to the same traps that grab unbelievers, such traps of addiction, broken relationships, etc. Those who talk the loudest sometimes get all of our time, meaning people who come into the church and want to do big things, and even possibly in the children's ministry, but their agenda is not long-term fruit. Yes, we have to take care of the immediate needs of the spiritual development of young ones in front of us. But we also need to see those young ones as they will be 5, 10, and 20 years from now. We know the statistics of children raised in the church who then go away to college and lose their foundations in Christ. I know my biggest regret was giving time to people who were just noisy. And sometimes I would even overlook their character flaws. That those flaws kept them at a level of comfort that was dangerous to others. Some of them would fail the children. They would fail the church, their families, and most of all the Lord. But back to the positive. By depositing in those with hunger and strong character development, my husband and I have seen our work multiply. We could have made all of the trips to the nations, the 40 nations, but we mentored others and sent them and trained them to go to all corners of the world. Our small town was known at one time as Whiskey City, as it had the largest whiskey bottling plant in the world. This town sent destruction and pain out to the world with this product. We then sent out to the world ones with the word of healing and hope through the good news of the gospel. The town's 3 major employers are casino, liquor plant, and the casket company. People would laugh when we would tell them about this, but in this atmosphere of the generations of addiction, we saw many developed to send out with the gospel. Today, all of our staff were saved and mentored as children and teens, and they are strong in character. Our son is a graduate of Oral Roberts University with a major in Christian education, and he helped a 3rd-generation pastor pioneer his work in a young church in California called The Gathering. Today, our son is transitioning back to the Midwest to join us again in ministry. Our daughter is a key leader in the work here now. I remember sending both of them to the nations, even sending her when she was only 13 years old to a nation with a missions team without me. People come and they go. They are with you one day and they're quitting you the next. Ministry can at times be discouraging, but you have to look at the future picture. The parables of the talents, where the one who multiplied was given more. Sometimes our multiplication will come in the legacy we leave, especially in small communities, small churches. And that is most of our churches today, are 80 people and less. But sometimes they don't get any recognition, and people get discouraged because we compare ourselves to what we see in front of us. And a lot of times what we see in front of us would be churches that are in larger communities with larger congregations, larger volunteer staffs, larger facilities. But we need to look sometimes at ministry as like a garden. There are several kinds of gardens. You can have an herb garden. You can have a flower garden. You can have a vegetable garden. A flower garden gets a lot of attention. It's beautiful. Flowers and bees come to it. People are drawn to it. But it has a short season. And it has its destiny. You have a vegetable garden. It's not very pretty to look at. Most people don't want to walk out and look at your vegetable garden. Not a lot's drawn to it. But it has the capacity to have a fruit, even though it's a vegetable garden, but it has a fruit that can be frozen or canned for generations and for days ahead to be used. An herb garden may be small, maybe gets very little attention, but its purpose is to bring healing and possibly bring a little bit of a flavor to bland things in life. So we have to see our ministry as a garden with a destiny and a purpose that may be different from others. The garden may not be beautiful and may not win a garden club award, but it has its purpose. So when disappointment comes, and it will, begin to look for your long-term fruit that you may be overlooking. We found many times that leaders we trained would fail when pressure arose. Their character was so soiled at a young age that even though they'd given their lives to Jesus as an adult, they would fall into sin and walk away. They could only handle so much responsibility, and they would damage others as they were in leadership positions, teachers, etc. The word is clear why leaders need to have a higher standard, as it damages others if they fall. Look how we're all reeling when the news is broadcast of fallen leaders in the political arena, in media, even in our small neighborhoods, our public school teachers. All of this causes young ones to come to a place where they feel that everything is unstable. When Christian leaders fail, it's even more damaging because they represent Christ, and Christ never fails. Our leaders today in our church were nurtured while they were young. Even our children's pastor was placed in a position of teaching the children at a small Lutheran church she attended when she was only 12 years old. Character is developed during difficult times, and some never give character time to be developed. They cut and run from relationships, jobs, children, and they do whatever is best at the moment for them. We have a generation in front of us ready to be trained and formed and shaped in order to see the Lord's gospel expand and increase and advance. Today, we have a small group that meets once a week, and it trains 3rd grade through 5th grade in leadership. It's called Junior Leaders in Training. They are given responsibility in their children's church as ushers, helps ministry, assistants in the nursery. Even the older ones teach preschool lessons. Since I've worked for years in public school systems, and I've worked with probation youth, I have found that focusing on a person's strengths help them to be motivated away from negative behavior. I've worked for many years with children that are in intensive probation and children that families are in children's services, which are children that have been removed because of neglect or abuse. And so one service agency called Search Institute has identified 40 developmental assets, and when youth have a majority of these, the percentages drop for them becoming troubled youth and having behavioral issues. One asset is being in a religious community 1 or more hours a week. Another asset is service to others, where a youth serves in his community 1 hour or more per week. This causes a youth to feel valued by adults. As we work in children's ministry, try to not only take care of the immediate needs, the lesson plans, the volunteers, the funds or lack thereof, but look at the long-term fruit that you will leave behind you that will speak of your foundational truths being steadfast. When developing adult volunteers, cast the vision of investing in legacy, something that speaks about you afterwards. Malachi speaks of revival, that it will come when the hearts of the fathers are turned toward the sons, and the hearts of the sons are turned toward the fathers. Are we producing sons and daughters of destiny in the Lord's house that will have the character to carry the vision long term? Today we see the John Osteen, Joel Osteen legacy, the Ed Young Sr., Ed Young Jr. legacy, the Charles Stanley, the Andy Stanley minister legacy, and much more. These second-generation pastors and leaders were in a children's church at some point. Yes, they were mentored by their parents, but they were also touched by loving, committed teachers and volunteers. Let's all look for the fruit that remains. Thank you. I've enjoyed being with you. I hope this has been a blessing and that this helps. Thank you so much.